In this particular segment of video that I post, I wanted to be able to talk a little bit about students that come to us from other countries, and what do we do as a school system to be able to enroll them, and what things have to be considered. That's the biggest focus right now. I'm here with Pam Mesta, and she kind of leads that charge for the county, and I'm going to be able to have a conversation with her about this topic and how we kind of work together in the daily reality of PBW life to help kids that come from other countries. So the first question I have is, can you just talk about the trends that you've seen since the time you've been in Carroll County and what you know about students from other countries coming in the state of Maryland and maybe specifically Carroll County?
Absolutely. Camera or you?
Me, that's fine.
Okay. So my role in the school system is I work as the supervisor of ESOL, also English for speakers of other languages. So that encompasses a pre-K to 12 kind of scenario in our county. So maybe if we could back up a second and talk about trends, this may help any Maryland educator who's coming in. The recent numbers that were just reported at the end of October were close to 88,000 English learners statewide. That's across the 24 jurisdictions that we have in Maryland. Now that's a kindergarten through 12 number. The data doesn't reflect pre-K, although we do service them. So we do have a pretty large number. That number's doubled in close to 10 years, so it's definitely representative of the highest growing population we have nationwide and in Maryland. One of the big differences that we've seen, I've been in this job, I'm dating myself, but I've been in this job 17 years as the supervisor of ESOL, and one of the big challenges and differences that we've seen is 5-10 years ago, we had a lot of students that were adopted from other countries. We had a lot of younger students. What we're starting to see in Carroll County, as well as statewide trends, is students that are what we would term border kids. Students that are crossing the border in from a South American country who may or may not have been in school for 1 year, and you've had that experience, 2 years, 5 years. Limited native language proficiency, some really terrible situations crossing in. So the border student number has grown significantly. I mean, we're talking in the past 3 years. It was kind of really overwhelming. A lot of us really weren't prepared, for the numbers because we allocate our full-time employees out. So that's a big challenge, and we see that statewide. One of the statewide trends that we see are students coming specifically from El Salvador and Honduras. So those are the two biggest countries affected also by gang violence. So the difference and the trend that we're seeing now are students that are coming in, and sometimes we know nothing about them. We make assumptions. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong, but it's the trauma that the kids have endured that has been such a huge challenge. We've had kids that have had to literally commit murder in their country. We've had students that have witnessed the murder of their families, all the way to being involved in gang violence, to having just deprivation of food and being detained at the border, and that's another thing too. I mean, we certainly have undocumented students nationwide. When we register students for school in the state of Maryland, we require 3 things. So we require their birth certificate. A lot of times with our immigrant families, they don't have their birth certificates, so we do, what do you call that, when you have the parents prove, like an affidavit. Yeah. So we do that. They need proof of residency. Residency, not like, are they a documented student or do they have citizenship, but rather residency, their BGE bill or something like that. And then their immunizations, which 99% of the time, as you know, we restart them over at the health department. So aside from that, unless we've seen the specific paperwork, we don't always know who they are. But then we learn. We learn through the relationships that they build or don't build with people and what they tell us or don't tell us. But that's the big challenge. The other big trend that we're starting to see in Maryland are kids that are older that are dropping out of school. Because they come here, many people have hopes and dreams of having a certain kind of a life, and then they realize they need to work, they need money. So those challenges present themselves, and I think in the world of being a pupil personnel worker, it goes beyond registering kids. Our amazing PPW workers get to know the kids, they know the situations. We build a schedule, we build them a graduation plan, or we get them in, but then it's making sure that we're there to support them throughout the process. Are they aware of community resources? I know you all are amazing about giving them a bag of resources, and sometimes when people come, they will bring a folder, just like this, and they will bring everything that they have. And so pupil personnel workers are really good, and I think a key piece is to say, John, these are personal documents. You don't need to bring those to school. These are the 3 things you may need to bring to school. This is what you want to present. So I think a pupil personnel worker can help a family because sometimes they just don't know what to bring and what to provide. And a lot of it is very personal information that maybe they don't want to have. But yeah, I think it's being aware of the trauma that our kids are coming with and how that has changed over the past 3 or 4 years, knowing that our demographics are changing. I mean, we're talking close to 70% of our kids in our state are Spanish speakers. And in Carroll County specifically, we have, I guess probably around 35 to 40 languages right now, spread across 400 students. But a good 75% of our kids in Carroll County are Spanish speakers. But the numbers, another thing I think important to know as a pupil personnel worker is, depending which jurisdiction you're going to end up in, the community is going to dictate your flow of immigration, meaning that in Carroll County, we generally don't have affordable housing in many areas. We don't have a transportation system aside from the CATS, area transit, and we are our largest employer aside from the hospital. So there are things that play against us growing exponentially in Carroll, whereas in Frederick County, where you see a lot of resettled refugees, or Montgomery County with close to 27,000 English learners, you're going to see a totally different demographic. Almost like the closer you creep to DC, the larger the numbers grow. But that's been a big challenge for us and pupil personnel workers, because it's not like you register a student and they're good. Now you have trauma, you've got dropouts, you've got documentation that they may or may not have, you've got kids missing the immunization appointments, which is another thing that you guys are amazing about. But then the court, if we have a student that was detained that is an undocumented citizen, they're given a court date when they're detained. They may or may not go to court. We sometimes know about it, but we can't encourage it or enforce it or any way like that. But there are all these factors that play in, and attendance in our high schools is our biggest problem right now, bar none. So not to lay it all out there in one question, but those are the big pieces that my role in ESOL and the role of a pupil personnel worker have changed over the past 5 years.
Now, and you would look at your own county, if you're not from Carroll, and kind of get a sense of what the procedure is that they try to use when we have border kids come to your county schools, and how you proceed with enrollment. I know here we try, and I do, to sit down with the family with an interpreter and look at the documents. I think the hardest thing is getting a sense of how much schooling they've actually had, because some kids are in the 2nd grade, but they haven't been in attendance all school year because of whatever has been going on with them. But trying to figure out where to place them.
That's a big one. In the state of Maryland, we support an age-appropriate placement. That's tough for some people to kind of step out and look in, because an age-appropriate placement for us is not, sometimes kids haven't been in school for 3, 4, or 5 years. Doesn't mean I'm going to take that student who's 12 and put him back in kindergarten, right? So we have to take a look and see what would we recommend as an age-appropriate placement. But I know Mr. Mongol mentioned something that's really important. We look and see what do they have. Transcripts are critical, as you know, especially here at the secondary level. Do they have transcripts? Have they been in school? What was the last grade they attended? So even though age appropriate is 99% of the time where we're going to support as a state where we place students, sometimes there are these extenuating circumstances, and I know you and I have worked through a couple of those over the years. And school years vary. So you have South American countries that have a completely different school year than we have here in the United States. Yeah. So, and I can provide you, remind me, I have a document that we use statewide that also gives us the comparison. Where in El Salvador they're going to run, like in October to a different month than we would. So I can provide that, actually, just remind me to do that. We also have comparison guides. In most countries, a 9-10 means an A. So that's something that the pupil personnel worker, it's my bad.
That's okay.
That's something the pupil personnel worker would have to take a look at and see, okay, is this a student that has good grades and good attendance? We have compulsory attendance, as you know, in the United States and the state of Maryland. Most countries do not. I remember a time a few years back, we had a new student that came to one of our middle schools and he just evaporated. Like they couldn't find him anywhere, and he had just started, and I was thinking to myself, I bet he walked home for lunch. And I called and he says, hello. I was like, what are you doing there? He says, I came home for lunch. I'm like, you can't come home for lunch. So that's another piece that there's the cultural differences.
The cultural.
Yeah, that I think a pupil personnel worker would be critical. Just what does the United States school system look like? what does it mean to have to go to school? We had one a few years back at an elementary school, and the mom kept jumping out and looking at the buses outside, kept jumping in front of the bus to stop the bus. And we had explained to her, you don't have to do that here. The bus will stop. And the next day, the bus driver came in and told us the story, and she said the mom was at the door trying to stop the bus, and she wasn't sure. But, people struggle with those cultural differences and what's acceptable. Another thing in your world is bullying. What we find not acceptable here in terms of derogatory terms or the way people are spoken to or race, ethnicity, things like that are very acceptable in other places. So that's a difficult piece that really does take the eye of a pupil personnel worker or school counselor to talk to a student about those cultural differences and what's accepted. Trying to think of any of the other kind of big ones. Resources. A lot of our families do not know how to navigate the resources within their community. So I think that's a really critical role that you guys do an amazing job.
And I think you have to be careful with trying to create trust. And initially, they will be almost fearful of you because you're a school official, and they don't want to get in trouble, and they want to be compliant, but they're afraid. And you got to understand their mindset of how they're coming into something totally foreign. And kids within the school, these kids will come up on an SST meeting or a GAPS meeting because they're not being included at lunch. And what can you do to make sure that they're making relationships and finding friends and being included as much as possible? And then just kind of navigating the academics of their coming and how does the teacher kind of fill the gaps and resources go into the classrooms? How does that work? How do you determine that need?
Instructional need?
Yes.
So I think you're going to find it pretty similar nationwide. I mean, you're always going to have ESOL resource teachers, English ESL, in some other states they call it English as a second language. But the way that we operate in Carroll County and in most jurisdictions in Maryland is, let me back up a second. When we register in Carroll County, we have school-based registration. This creates opportunities for PPWs to make excellent relationships with our families, but it also creates frustration in some ways on the other end because I don't always know where the kids are until I get a call from Don and he'll say we've got a new student coming in or a call from a secretary. So when that happens, we get the student registered, we do some testing. We have the same test we use across the state of Maryland to identify a student for ESOL services, and it's actually in 30-some states. Once we identify do they need services, we provide generally 2 levels of service. We support them in their content classroom to help make that content accessible, help take out the language complexity that happens and the content complexity. And then we also, if needed, will do some pull-out instruction. I'm not a big fan of pull-out, but we will do that at the high school level where students will get Spanish 1 and 2. Our kids would take ESOL 1 and 2, which carries out in your world as the completer, the foreign language or an elective credit kind of situation. So there are ways that we support them instructionally. I think where the missing link is that our PPWs do such a nice job of is trying to connect with the kids and keeping them in school. It's tough. We're starting to lose kids at that secondary level because they want to work. I think the key is to try to help them understand, yes, you may be an undocumented citizen, but this diploma may open doors for you. If they're here in the seat, we're going to do everything in our power to give them every single opportunity. Well, you know how I am. But, I want them in academic placement. I want them to be challenged. I want to do everything I can while they're here. Now, if they're undocumented, is the high school diploma going to change their world in 3 years? I don't know that answer, but I have to believe that it will. And I think that's where we try to instill that belief in the kids, about the importance of staying in. We recently did a survey at our highest population high school with our kids, and we asked them a zillion questions. And one of the interesting things was, it said, is a high school diploma, and they know what that is, graduation important to you? All but one said yes, and there was one that said I didn't know. That was a really surprising answer for me, Don. We did that up at the mill. Because I thought for sure they would say, many said it wasn't. But that tells me there's other extraneous factors here that if we can help support them with balancing their job, their work life. Another one was, why do you miss school? 99% of them tired, working at night.
Right.
Missed the bus. Nobody to take me to school. So that's another thing you all are amazing at sometimes is providing that transportation or trying to connect them up with those things. And then bullying. That was another thing that came out in our survey where kids sometimes are silently bullied. And until they build a relationship with somebody like you or
Right.
somebody else, we don't know those pieces until, again, we build the relationships with them. And there's just a lot of roadblocks.
So I want you to consider all these pieces. And the other thing about enrollment with these students that come to us is you have to determine whether they're homeless or not, because sometimes they come here
Good point.
and they come and they're here by themselves. They're staying with a relative, but their mother may have left and stayed back in Honduras or wherever.
Yeah, we have an increase statewide of what are called unaccompanied youth, which I believe is what you're referencing.
Right.
And remember, was it maybe 3 years ago, we had a huge unaccompanied youth grant that came through to the state of Maryland, which was great for each of the jurisdictions. We used it to provide additional instructional support, which was wonderful, and some after-school help. But that number is increasing, or the students that are age of majority, so they're making their own decisions about their schooling.
Yes.
They may or may not have support systems. And documentation is a big thing. You know, if you have an undocumented citizen, it is a scary thing. And my husband's a cop, and years ago I used to work as a police interpreter, pre 9/11, and I would be out on scene in a very large jurisdiction close to DC, and you would have to see people almost commit multiple felonies or multiple crimes to even hear about deportation. Now, it's very different. The climate is different, so I think you hit the nail on the head earlier on. Our families have this level of distrust. I don't know if I can trust you. I don't know you yet. I may not want to tell you certain things. We can assume them by the paperwork that we see, but parents are very guarded. One of the most recent challenges I had this year, I guess probably wouldn't have affected you over here, but we had students that didn't want to go to outdoor school, which we send our 6th graders over to because they were afraid that when they got home, their parents wouldn't be there. Or somebody's going to pick them up, take them out. And so I didn't even think about that. And 3 of my teachers actually work at outdoor school at night. It didn't even dawn on me till they stopped going. So it's learning what those root causes are, seeing why are they missing school, talking to the kids, and then trying to build the relationship to get them in. I mean, I know you're amazing at that, and that's the key, is to try to build the relationship, get them in, see what the barrier is, and try to work with admin to see if we can come up with a unique schedule for them. I know they're amazing at that over here at Gateway too, but that's the key. They can't be treated as traditional kids. They're not going to graduate in 4 years, right? So we just have to, as soon as they get in the seat, graduation plan for them, success plan. Do we send food home on Fridays? Well, maybe we don't send them a giant bag of food so they feel shamed on the bus. Maybe we find a way to put it in a bag or get them the resources without saying, hey, I know you need resources. Those are the tricks.
So, again, this whole video, and we're kind of wrap it up here.
Sorry, I talked too
want
much.
you to be able to have a good sense of how to, what's the process of trying to get them enrolled, and things you have to consider as you're trying to work with those families to do what's in the best interest of the student and the family as they continue to come, and it's not going to stop anytime soon. Okay, so we'll follow up with this in terms of you doing something online through the threads about this video. Okay, thanks.